Good evening. Looking for hobos, wanting to hear a story. It's Friday night. It's David Domine in Louisville, Kentucky, ready to share further readings of his most recent memoir, Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa, an unconventional memoir. It's about my time living in a supposedly haunted house in Louisville, Kentucky. Hey, Ashley, there's Catherine, Charles, Bonnie, Laura Houston, good to see you. Hey, Wendy, are you guys back from Slade yet? Yes, Ashley likes to be referred to as Ashley the Great, just so you all know. And there's Michelle and Lisa. Yeah, we're all hobos tonight, I guess. So there's Laura, Calhoun, and Belinda. Good to see you all again. Hey, Kathy. Kathy Crabb, by the way, in case you don't know, has a shop called Unorthodox. It wasn't old Louisville until she betrayed us and moved out of town, out of the neighborhood a year ago. She's actually in this, so I'll read a little about her. But I don't know if any of you are Netflix creeps, but there's a show called Unorthodox about this woman. It's based on a memoir about a woman who left the Hasidic community she was in Brooklyn, and she went to Germany where her mother was living. And so Kathy's been commenting on Facebook that she's getting a lot of friend requests and tags at Unorthodox, the name of her store, because of this Netflix show. So if you want some creepy things, she's got like Victorian vampire killing kits and skeletons, all kinds of creepy stuff. So contact Kathy Crabb if you want anything creepy in old Louisville. She's the expert to go to. She can get you some old coffins, and she has all kinds of things. So there's Margie, our resident Hillebrand House witch, and there's Mike Horan and Aunt Jane and Laura. Good to see you. And there's Dawn and Chris and Terry. So I'm glad you're all tuning in tonight. So if you remember last night, we had kind of a cliffhanger. The chapter ended with me and Fritz at Juanita's Burger Boy, which since then has just been called Burger Boy. I kind of missed the days of Juanita's. It was a real dive 20 years ago when I was writing this. And that's where all the college kids went after the bars let out in Louisville about 4 o'clock in the morning. Dan, the current owner, he's kind of cleaned it up a bit, which is good. But, a dive, it's always good to be a little dirty if you're a dive. So I had gone there. I was on one of my late night strolls. I had gone over to the Mag Bar because I realized they had some figs. They had a fig tree in the backyard. Aunt Jane had sent me, hey, Luis Miguel Macias. Aunt Jane had sent me some canned figs, but I wanted some fresh figs. So I went over there, got some fresh figs. There was a possum in the tree eating them. Hey, Claudia. Good to see you. Hey, Mitzi, Liz. Oh, I got a Peru student tonight. Good to see you, Liz. And Mady and Bob and Tom and Pat and Patricia. Good to see you all tonight. But ended up at Juanita's Burger Boy, and there was Bo. And if you remember, Bo was this guy I met one night. I was at my computer up at the top of the house, the old Casa Fabulosa, and a rock came sailing through the window. Hey, Susan. And landed in my lap. And Bo, it turns out, had an aversion to doorbells. He didn't like using doorbells. So he had this little rock he'd carry around. He'd throw it at windows to get people's attention. So I met him. We went through the neighborhood. Hey, Thomas. They've got our Pink Palace people tonight. That's good. Joanne Klein. Good to see you. Karen. There's Chris. Good to see you. And so he had come to tell me about a weird story about this one-armed ghost that would kind of float along 4th Street. And last night, when I ran into him at Juanita's Burger Boy, I shared with him that I'd found a weird story from the Atlanta Constitution about a house on 4th Street, one of the mansions, where they woke up one morning and they found a decaying arm hanging from their front door. And that is Susan and Jeff's house on 4th Street. It was the old Alice Bacon house. And he was all excited when I found that out. And we were talking, and all of a sudden, we heard the screech. We were saying goodbye, heard the screech, and all of a sudden a car came barreling toward me. And that's where we left off last night. what was going to happen with the car barreling toward me. Hey, Barban and Belinda, good to see you again. And there's VG, the other Pink Palace person. So we're just going to do two shorter chapters tonight. So like I said, I'm trying to milk this out because I think we're going to be here for another at least 2, 3, 4 weeks. So I'm trying to stretch this out. I'll maybe try to intersperse some commentary and other stories. Hey, Steve and Kathy and the other Sue. But we're going to read 2 chapters tonight. And this one of these chapters is one of my kind of creepier encounters because I discovered there are indeed real-life hobos. You know, we found out there are gypsies in Louisville, there's witches, there's voodoo queens, and there's a lot of hobos as well. Hey, Lisa Thompson, good to see you, South End girl. All right, so this chapter is called Storm and Norman and the Galt House Ghost. Hey, Terry and Marcia, good to see you. Becky, good to see you. All right, so it was Tuesday evening of the next day, and instead of anyone cooking, the gang had decided to meet at Birno's by the bridge for beer and pizza. Located on the bottom floor of a massive building originally built as offices for the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, the well-known pizzeria sat in the shadows of the 2nd Street Bridge. The waitress was about to bring our order, and I had resumed my recap of the previous night's event. So I was getting ready to cross the intersection with Fritz and go back home when this car ran a red light and it had to swerve to miss another car. It missed us before it ran up onto the curb and hit a stone retaining wall, I said. I took a sip from my beer and passed around the basket of breadsticks. The car lost its 2 front hubcaps and they came rolling back across the street and missed us by a few feet. Wow, you guys are really lucky, said Laura. Beth nodded her head and made room for the arriving pizza at the center of the crowded table. It's a good thing nobody got hurt. Chris Nuff says his uncle was a hobo out in Oregon. Oh, that's good. Love to hear about hobos. Let's talk about it later. So I helped myself to a slice and doused it with Parmesan cheese and red pepper flakes. The front end of the car was messed up, but other than that, it wasn't too bad. It sure added a lot of excitement to the evening, that's for sure. Everyone from Juanita's came out to see what all the fuss was about. You better watch out, laughed Wendy. One of these days your luck is going to run out and then the mean streets of old Louisville are going to get to you. We'll see. I deposited another piece of pizza on the plate Skippy held out across the table in my direction, but so far, so good. There's David McHugh. He finally was able to join us. So David McHugh, you heard about him the other night. He and Ramon were sitting on the edge of the pool, dipping their feet in the water while we were sitting around and eating. So David McHugh's part of the original Thursday/Monday/Tuesday night dinner club. So everyone say hi to David McHugh. And there's Robin. Good to see you tonight, Robin. All right. So, continuing. Oh, look. Wendy shifted slightly in her seat and pointed to the stairs at the front of the restaurant. It's Micah. Sure enough, the tall figure with the violin case entered and passed near our table. I wonder where he's going, she said as he drifted from sight. Funny, I said. I saw him last night before I walked over to Juanita's. Almost ran into him on the sidewalk outside the Mag Bar. Hey, Allie, good to see you. Beth chuckled and wiped her mouth. You should ask him if he knows Josephine or the Stick Witch or any of these other people that are supposed to be haunting the neighborhood. Suddenly, my mind raced back to the night before. Speaking of hauntings, I said, I think I might have been given a good lead about a new story. A ghost story? Skippy grabbed the pitcher of beer and refilled his glass. Or maybe a story about one of the neighborhood weirdos. A ghost story, I said. When we were out on the street after the accident last night, this older guy started talking to me and said the place attached to Juanita's is haunted. So I described the tall frame building that shared a wall with the diner, and everyone seemed to understand the building I was talking about. Supposedly 2 ex-cons or something like that broke into the place when the woman renting the apartment on the top floor was working her shift waiting tables at Juanita's. It was back in the 70s, and the woman left her daughter up there all by herself. She was only 7 or 8, I think. Oh no, what happened? Laura stopped chewing and seized a napkin as a look of dread came over her. Well, this old guy claims they killed the little girl and left her body in the closet. The mother found it when she came back from her shift that night, and the closet's been haunted ever since then. I popped a naked bit of crust into my mouth and chewed. People who've lived in that apartment say they always hear crying coming from that little closet. Hey, Lisa and Mitzi. And by the way, this is a story I have actually been investigating for many, many years, but I talked to the girl's mother, and her name is actually Loretta, and she lived in the Hillebrand house as well. So don't confuse her with the Loretti on the top floor who's blinking her lights on and off to me. But she told me all this stuff, and she was a waitress at Juanita's Burger Boy. But after I interviewed her the first couple times, she went and talked to her family, and they said they didn't like her talking about her daughter's murder, their sister and their niece's murder. So she said she wasn't really keen on me sharing the story, so I never shared this story. All right. Maybe if I ever hear from the family in the future, I'll write this story down. But this is one of several stories I have from the neighborhood that's pretty creepy, but I actually never wrote it down in book form. Okay? All right. So Beth continues. Oh, that's really awful. She crumpled a napkin on her plate and then pushed it away. Yeah, it is, if it really happened like the guy said. I'll have to snoop around and see if I can find any record of the murder. I drained the last bit of beer from my glass and sat back in my chair. The waitress brought us the check, and we chatted for a while longer. When it came time to leave, I boxed up some of the leftover pizza to take to Ramon, who had to work late that night, and we made our way up the sidewalk and said our goodbyes. In front of the old Ashler building was a historical marker about the famous Galt House, and I stopped to read it. So Louisville people, you know this building. It's right next to the 2nd Street Bridge. A lot of people call it, the old Galt House, but it was built on the site of a former Galt House. But although the building housing the basement pizzeria had been built in 1877 as office headquarters for the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, the original Galt House Hotel had occupied the site before that, from 1835 until 1865, when a fire destroyed it. Charles Dickens had stayed there once, and so had a host of other notables, including General Ulysses S. Grant, who met there in 1864 with General Sherman to plan his infamous march to the sea. I'd always heard rumors that the place was haunted and that the basement was riddled with a maze of underground tunnels that led to the river, but somehow I'd never managed to penetrate the secret parts of the building. Once I was done reading the marker, I prepared to round the corner and return to the car, which I'd parked down on the street behind the old building, when something caught my eye. It was a large vertical sign painted in a recess on the facade, and there, staring down at me, was a gypsy woman scrying a crystal ball. When I saw the turban on her head and the hoops dangling from her ears, I remembered the paper airline message Skippy had handed over to me not too long before. And all at once, I knew why the sketch I had seen looked so familiar. It was a hand-drawn reproduction of the sign that loomed over me, complete with the Great Dane that stood on its hind legs and a comical rendering of a stereotypical ghost. The only thing missing on the drawn version I had received were the words such as Madame Zelda over the gypsy woman, and the entertaining featured, which was Storm and Norman and the Galt House Ghost, every Saturday at 9:15. And of course, the words at the top of the sign, which advertised something known as Squirrely's Magic Tea Room. Hey, Jeffrey Fisher-Smith. Got another Becky, and there's Cindy Brady and Marty. Good to see you all tonight. And if you remember, several chapters ago, we were out in the backyard of the Casa Fabulosa, and supposedly someone just threw a message over the wall, and it was a picture of like a gypsy or something. Skippy brought it into me, and I didn't know anything about it, but tonight I'm making that connection, what it's all about. So I had seen figures on the drawing before, and now I was standing in front of their inspiration. Squirrely's Magic Tea Room was something of a local legend, a bit of quirk that all Louisvillians knew about, and because of its proximity to the heavily trafficked bridge that crossed over to Indiana from 2nd Street. How many times had I driven past and read the colorful sign without really knowing what it was all about? Coincidentally, I had run into my friend Kelly a few days before, and when Squirrely's Magic Tea Room somehow came up in the conversation, he was a wealth of information. So it seems a man by the name of Larry Jones was the brains behind the operation, and he first became interested in magic as a teenager living in New York in the early 1940s. After getting a law degree from the University of Virginia, he moved to Louisville to join a law firm in the 1950s. Under the stage name of Baron Laval, he achieved a certain degree of national recognition and even appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show and on Captain Kangaroo. When he was in his 60s and still practicing law, he opened Squirrely's Tea Room in downtown Louisville, where he designed a 75-seat magic theater upstairs in the old Louisville and Nashville Railroad building. And people started calling him Captain Squirrely, and ever since, he had been delighting weekly audiences with his burlesque magic show. Even though it wasn't Saturday, the night of his regular performances, it appeared that a lot of people were entering the building and going upstairs to the Magic Tea Room area. So I made my way back to the building and up the stairs. On the way, I bumped into one of the waiters, someone who used to work with me at the Seelbach Hotel, and when I asked him what was going on, he said there was a private party that evening and that Captain Squirrely himself was on hand for the entertainment. It didn't take much before he motioned for me to follow him through a door to an area off limits to all but the employees, and he told me to feel free to hide out there as long as I wanted while I eavesdropped and took in visual tidbits of the show. Colorful, oversized posters of old-time magicians hung on the walls, and on the stage stood an older gentleman I assumed to be the self-same Squirrely. He wore a brown plaid suit and had pulled a pigeon from a hat. To the side was a wooden table draped with a red cloth where he had laid out some of the tools of his trade. Several silver rings, a vase of flowers, a saw, and a number of small, unidentifiable objects. After several card tricks, I grew a bit antsy and decided to explore a bit on my own. I found my friend and asked him to point me in the direction of the basement, which he was reluctant to do until I lied and promised that I would not get into any trouble or do anything stupid. "If you get caught," he said, "I'm saying I've never seen you before in my entire life." Then he gave me a detailed set of instructions on how to access the secret parts of the building. As I left the magical tea room, there was a roar of applause and laughter as Squirrely delighted the crowd with another trick. Pretending that I knew where I was going, I made my way to the stairs. On a midpoint landing, I discovered a recessed area in the brick wall that might have doubled as a closet had it not been for the colorful bit of painted archway framing the entryway. Painted to simulate an intricate and multi-hued mosaic pattern, the sculpted piece of wood looked like it might have been inspired by a palace from the Middle East. I had discovered Madame Zelda's lair, and there sat the enigmatic woman herself at a small table in front of an exotically tapestried wall hanging. On the other side of the table, where the flame of a solitary candle flickered in the semi-darkness, an attentive customer leaned in and listened as Zelda told her fortune. But instead of using the crystal ball depicted in the sign outside, the fortune teller appeared to be reading her client's palm. There was no sign at all of a crystal ball, and nothing was in the immediate vicinity. "Hey, Maria, good to see you." So not only that, instead of the turban-wearing gypsy woman with the fiery eyes and large hoop earrings, this lady looked like a plain old and undecidedly non-clairvoyant senior citizen in her black satin blouse and close-cropped white hair. I stood off to the side so I could eavesdrop. "You will meet a man who will bring you lots of happiness and wealth," she told the eager listener. "And prunes, he will come bearing prunes," she said. with a bit of twang and no small degree of solemnity. What? This palm reader didn't even have the slightest Eastern European accent. And what kind of fortune teller saw prunes coming in somebody's future? Muttering to myself, I returned to the stairs. There's Sheila. Good to see you tonight. And Glenda, glad you're back. Mentally, following my friend's directions, I made my way to the main area of the restaurant and eventually stumbled across the employee lounge he had described. Uncomfortable-looking chairs were scattered about, and a tired man hunched over a newspaper and a cup of coffee at a corner table, but other than that, the room was empty. As instructed, I strode to the back and pushed through an inconspicuous door, beyond which lay an entirely different world, a realm of murky shadows and cavernous spaces that couldn't be reached by the stark fluorescent lights of the break room. Yeah, prunes, I don't know. That's what she was saying, you know. That's what fortune tellers do. So letting my eyes adjust to the dimness, the only light seeped through a multitude of dirt-streaked windows that faced the bridge and the street lamps that lined it. I was amazed to find myself in what appeared to be an entirely different building than the one I had entered. Apparently vacant and unused, the entire back part of the old structure looked like an eerie time capsule that went back to the 1920s and 30s. Here and there, intruders had left footprints in the thick layer of dust covering the floor in most of the rooms, and random cardboard boxes and crates rested against the wall in the main corridor. Steps away beckoned the grand staircase, which led to more prohibited floors and vacant rooms above. And I went over to it and let my hand glide up the railing as I made my ascent. Curiously, the railing had a cool gleam and was free of dust as if people were traipsing up and down it at all times. I followed to the steps to the top, looked around, and then made my way back down. On the walls around the stairwell hung an assortment of old pictures and framed newspaper articles about the original Galt House and other local landmarks. Some of them reported an infamous murder here and there or well-known hauntings in the area. In one yellowing article, a reporter claimed that this building, constructed on the site of the former hotel, was supposedly haunted by a man known as Captain Jack. Along with a woman named Elizabeth and her young daughter, he was trapped and burned to death in the fire. Not too far away, I found a framed poster with a woman's face emerging from a wisp of cloud or smoke. The caption, written across the front of the poster, asked, "Is this the woman whose spirit many have claimed to see in this building?" The fading orange of the poster background seemed to match the leatherette upholstery of an Art Deco circular sofa that rested nearby. The pillowed backrest column rising from its center was dulled by a thin layer of grime. After trespassing in the dark crevices of the upper levels, I stopped at the top of the stairs leading down to the basement. Reputedly, the subterranean area was huge and stretched all the way to the river, where bootleggers unloaded moonshine deliveries during Prohibition and engaged in all types of illicit activities. If I listened hard enough, I could almost hear their coarse language and the shouts of river rats echoing off the walls beneath my feet. I tried an antique push-button light switch in the wall, but to no avail. The light sconce down on the next landing remained dark. I looked over my shoulder and saw a number of shadows thrown across the wall. Probably people walking by on the bridge, I told myself. I leaned forward and tried to see to the bottom of the steps, but the weak light streaming through the windows failed to match the lowest portion of the basement stairs. Even though I knew it was better to leave, my feet wouldn't cooperate, and before I knew it, my hand was gliding down the smooth railing to the next landing. Grit and sand seemed to puncture every step I took with abrasion, and soon I found myself standing in total darkness. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed the railing and lowered myself into the void. In the back of my mind, I convinced myself that I would find a working light switch at the bottom, but when I stepped off the last tread and started feeling around on the wall, I only found another push-button set that turn nothing on when depressed. I only could run my fingers over the wall and explore. After feeling around and coming up empty-handed, I finally decided to leave, and I was making my sluggish way back to the steps when I bumped into something. It felt like a small bedside table or something that had been pushed up against the wall, and upon further examination, my hands discovered something that brought a smile to my face. After a bit of fumbling, I found the button, pressed, and hoped for the best. Sure enough, it worked, and a sudden beam of yellow light sliced the darkness. It was a large industrial flashlight, the square kind with the top handle, and it must have been left on the wooden stand for people wanting to go on further into the basement. I shone it around to get my bearings, and in a far wall, I saw a door. Ooh, am I going to go in that door? What do you think? Well, now's a good time to take a drink. So cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight. If you didn't tell people what you're drinking before, make sure you tell people what you're drinking tonight. I'm doing Benchmark again tonight, by the way, in my beautiful tumbler that Matt Sweeney dropped off on the front porch the other night. And tell people where you're from. Say hi. It's really fun to see all the comments going back and forth. It seems that there's a lot of people kind of meeting each other for the first time during these live streams, and lots of people have plans to hook up and meet afterwards. So can't wait till this is all over and behind us, and we can have a nice Voodoo Days reunion. Of course, we'll have to do it in old Louisville, maybe in Central Park. That would be a good place, okay? So thanks for checking in tonight. By the way, speaking of checking in, you can check in on Facebook. You can check in at La Casa Fabulosa. Doing a little thing such as this, a lot of you don't realize how much it can help. Like someone like me trying to promote a neighborhood, trying to promote my books. Just one little thing like checking in or giving a review on Amazon.com, which some of you have done, which is really great. It really helps a lot. So if you can check in at La Casa Fabulosa or Old Louisville, America's Most Haunted Neighborhood. You could even do the Magic Library, where we are tonight. It really helps connect us and create all these little liaisons. And like I said, the big thing we're trying to do is get the word out about Old Louisville, America's Most Haunted Neighborhood, and just let people know what a great neighborhood it is. So if you don't know about Old Louisville, it's one of the largest historic preservation districts in the entire country. People don't hear about it a lot, though. They hear about Savannah, they hear about Charleston, they know about Beacon Hill in Boston and Georgetown and the D.C. area. Everyone knows about, so my Wisconsin family and friends are saying make it on a weekend so they can come down. Yeah, I'll make sure to do that when we have our reunion. But, everyone knows about New Orleans, the Garden District, of course, the French Quarter. They get a lot of attention, but in recent years, so many stories of hauntings have been emerging from Old Louisville, an area of 45 square blocks with over 1,000 old mansions and homes. It's not surprising that they're starting to call us America's Most Haunted Neighborhood. And there's Yumi, a student from many, many years ago at U of L, and are you in Tokyo? I forget, Yumi, but Yumi is from Japan, and it's really great to see her checking in tonight. We got people from friends of mine from Scotland and England, Mexico, Spain, Portugal. It's great to see people outside the United States checking in. So good to see you all. And like I said, invite your friends, do a watch party. The more people we can get, the better. It just helps the neighborhood. And like I said, I'm trying to milk another week or so out of this. I thought by the 22nd we'd be done, but maybe I can get a couple more days, and then I can probably read a couple other things after that. But let's hope by the time I'm done reading and telling these stories, we're out of this current pandemic lockdown, and we can get out and about a little more. All right? So thanks again to Sean Stafford. He's my friend. He's been doing a lot of work on the website. His mother, Claudia, if you see Claudia Stafford, say hi. That's Sean's mother. He's done a lot of great work. We're doing videos and really trying to get the word out. So thanks for all the people who are helping me kind of spread the word about Louisville, especially Old Louisville, Kentucky. Okay, So we kind of left off with a cliffhanger. So what do you think? Am I going to go in the door or not go in the door? Well, chances are I would go in the door like that. So I did go in the door. So let's continue with our next chapter, which is called Hobos. And that's kind of a theme in this book because Ramon was always calling me a hobo. He never approved of the way I dressed. Sometimes I'd leave in the morning to go teach at the University of Louisville or Bellarmine where I was teaching, and he'd say, "Comb your hair, you look like a hobo." And I was like, "I'll just comb it tomorrow, you know." I'm not such a prima donna that I care what I look like, but he cared what I looked like, so he was always criticizing me and telling me I look like a hobo. So last couple nights, I don't know if we had many hobo encounters, but every time Ramon called me a hobo, we'd take a sip of bourbon. So let's take a sip of bourbon because we're meeting a real life hobo in this chapter. All right, so hobos. After pausing a moment to listen and make sure nobody else was skulking about, I went to the door and pushed it open. A loud scrape echoed across the floor as the warped wood at the bottom caught the concrete and stuck until I forced my way through to the other side. It appeared to be an enormous underground room that went on for 100 yards or more, but how far it really extended I couldn't be sure because the flashlight only illuminated the first 10 or 20 yards. From somewhere in the darkness came the faint trickle of water. It also seemed the odor of cigarettes hung in the air. I swung the flashlight beam to my right and then to my left, where a rivulet of water ran down a seam in the nearest wall. Although the area seemed largely empty, clusters of boxes and old pieces of furniture had been deposited here and there. In a recessed area of the wall to my right, several enormous casks rested on their sides, and several yards away, rotting staves had been swept into a mound. Against the wall stood 3 rusty circular bands that had probably held the barrels together at one time. From the generous circumference of the iron hoops, I assumed the casks to be the typical hogsheads that at one time rolled through the streets of downtown Louisville by the hundreds. They were filled with tobacco and bourbon. Back then, if they weren't packed full with 1,000 pounds of tobacco, chances are they contained pork, whiskey, or any other number of other items processed in the city. I stopped to listen again, and as I stood there, a distant roar seemed to rise above the trickling water. Could the basement really extend all the way to the river? It sounded like the far-off rushing of water, but then again, it could have been nothing more than an acoustical phenomenon triggered by the unusual surroundings. Letting the yellow beam of light guide me, I moved forward into the shadows. Farther on, several more barrels stood on their ends, and an enormous and empty picture frame leaned up against the wall. Next to that waited a man wearing a gray trench coat and a baseball cap. I asked, was this a real person or was I hallucinating? "Do not worry," the man said in a gravelly voice. "I will not hurt you." He shifted his feet and moved his face to avoid the immediate glare of my light. My heart pounding in my throat, I jumped and almost stumbled backward. I was too startled to speak, and my feet were telling me to back away from the stranger. "Sorry, I did not mean to scare you." He took a drag on a bit of cigarette held between his thumbs and forefinger, and then cast it to the ground, where he mashed it out with the heel of a worn-out boot. "I was not expecting anybody to find me down here. Usually, I am here all by myself." Finally, my heartbeat slowed a bit, and I was able to regain my speech. "Sorry if I'm bothering you," I said. "I thought the place was empty." "Yes, so did I," he said. "But every once in a while, someone finds his way to the underground." A niggling at the pit of my stomach told me to make a hasty exit, but curiosity got the better of me, and I stood my ground. "I guess that means you're in this basement a lot, then?" More often than not, he said. He took a step in my direction. I know my way around here as well. It goes on and on. Squinting, he stopped and studied me for a moment. Now, you do not look like you come to the underbelly of the city very often. It was at that moment the formality of the man's speech finally hit me. He didn't sound like he was from the area. Despite the haggard voice, there was a precision to his words and a certain clipped elegance to his accent. No, I said, I don't come down here much at all. Not many people do, he said. But sometimes young people find their way to these dark passages in the middle of the night. Or else the employees from the restaurant get bored and they creep down here on a dare. It does not happen very often, but I usually stay out of sight when they do. He took another step in my direction and reached into his pocket. I watch. After taking a cigarette, he lit it and examined the glowing end. Sometimes I just watch. I observed the gray stubble on his chin as he took a long drag on a cigarette and then exhaled a long stream of smoke through his nostrils. I guess I should be going, I said. Sorry if I disturbed you. I started to back away. Do not let me scare you off, he said, taking another low step. On rare occasions, I do like to talk to people who come below. Well, I really should leave. I took another step backward, and that was when an overpowering odor reached my nose. It seemed to be the intense mix of body reek and alcohol that I'd smelled on severe alcoholics before, the result of years of cheap booze, saturating the perspiration that oozed through their pores. My name is Norman, he said, catching me off guard. What is yours? I hesitated a moment. My name's Jim. I wanted to turn and hightail it out of there, but suddenly a thought struck me. Say, you're not Stormin' Norman of Stormin' Norman and the Galt House Ghost, are you? Who? He inhaled a lungful of smoke and held it for several seconds before releasing it with a slight groan. Did you say something about a ghost? Stormin' Norman and the Galt House Ghost, I repeated. You know, the ones advertised on the big hand-painted sign on the front of the building. No, I do not know this Stormin' Norman or the Galt House Ghost, he said. And I do not believe I have seen this sign you describe. I raised a finger and pointed above. It's up there on 2nd Street, on the front of the building, I said. You can't miss it. It's right there when you come in the main doorway. Norman slowly shook his head, and he took another long drag on a cigarette. I have never come through that door, he said. Or any other door up above, for that matter. Eyes narrowing ever so slightly, he studied me for a moment and scratched the stubble on his left cheek. Well, then how do you... I stopped short when I realized he must have gained access through the creepy basement. Did this guy have knowledge of the supposed system of secret tunnels that ran under the entire city? Almost as if he had read my mind, Norman nodded his head and smiled. When you are a hobo such as I, you learn about the hidden places in a town. What? I laughed nervously. You didn't say you were a hobo, did you? For a few seconds, there was silence between us, a lack of conversation that was punctuated by the sharp sound of trickling water. Then he sucked on his cigarette and released the smoke with another slight groan. Yes, I did say that I'm a hobo, he said. I've been riding the rails most of my life, almost as long as I cared to remember. I studied Norman, and with my brows furrowed together as images of hobos flooded my mind, Norman hobos, I discovered, really came into their own during the Great Depression, and they tended to hang out near the railroad tracks, where they roasted weenies around campfires and ate pork and beans straight from the can, and they dressed a certain way. True, Norman did have a nice hobo coat, but the baseball cap seemed to look out of place. I was doubtful about his assertion. I know what you are thinking, he said, like he had read my mind again, that hobos are a thing of the past. But they are not. We are amongst you today. Oh, I forgot hobo, yeah. We've been saying hobo a lot, so cheers. Norman flicked a bit of ash from the tip of his cigarette and crossed his arms. We do not carry bindles anymore, just so you know. For the first time, I noticed a chill in the dank room, and a light shudder ran across my back. What's a bindle? I said. You know, he said. It is the pack hobos carry at the end of a stick in all of the cartoons. Hobos always carry a bindle in the cartoons. Well, I didn't know there was an actual name for those things, I said. Maybe Norman was a real hobo after all. Yes, said Norman. Such a contraption is called a bindle, and nobody uses them nowadays. His arms still crossed, he raised his cigarette to his lips, took one last puff that caused the end to flare, and he ground out the butt with his heel after he threw it down. Well, you learn something new every day, I said. There came a light scurrying from the distant wall, and I directed the flashlight beam in that direction. Whatever it was remained hidden in the shadows, however. Norman didn't appear bothered by the intrusion and continued his didactics. There are those of us who still use some of the old things, though, he said. For example, the old carvings and symbols left on fence posts and the sides of buildings. If you know how to read these signs, you will know if a town welcomes you or despises you, where food and medicine can be had, and so forth. Although the topic really was starting to interest me, I could feel a kind of tightness behind my eyes that signaled the late hour and reminded me that I need to get home. In addition, I had slowly come to realize that it probably wasn't a wise move to be all alone in a dark basement in an abandoned building with a complete stranger, no matter how nicely he spoke. I should really head back upstairs, I said. Wait, he said. Let me show you something. Without waiting for a response, Norman walked over to the section of wall where the hogshead barrels rested. Then he leaned down and shouldered one of them to the side. There, in the wall, were the outlines of a small door that was maybe 5 feet high. He extended one of his arms and pushed the door open. There, he said, brushing dust from his coat sleeve. This will take you to many secret places. Come with me. He motioned for me to follow him and ducked inside. I walked over to the doorway and shone the light inside. Caught in the glow of the flashlight beam, Norman stood there and waited. The sound of rushing water seemed to me much more intense now. The ceilings in this space were very low and had to be at least less than 6 feet. If I went inside, I would have to stay stooped over the whole time. But I told myself that would be a small price to pay to finally get into the famed secret tunnels below the city, if that's where I was really headed. From the looks of it, the room Norman had entered was very long and extremely narrow and had the appearance of a tunnel. Come, he said. A gleam filled his eyes and he motioned with an arm. Do I follow him and go into the secret tunnel, or do I go home? Well, that's what you'll find out tomorrow night, because that's where we're leaving off tonight. So that was the chapter about hobos and voodoo days at La Casa Fabulosa. And that really happened. Never ran in. Well, I'm not gonna say anything else about Norman because you got to read the last part. But yeah, I survived because I'm still here. So Joanne Klein, she knows. But thanks for tuning in tonight. So I don't know what time it is. I don't know if we made it all the way to 10 o'clock. But Sue Gale's telling me to go home. Well, we'll have to see. I got really creeped out because I realized, I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I thought, well, if he kills me, no one's going to know. Oh, they'll see my car parked up on the street outside the pizzeria, but who knows if they'd ever find me. So, yeah, tune in tomorrow night and you'll find out what happens. By the way, I think is my goddaughter Olivia tuning in tonight. If Olivia's tuning in, say hi to Olivia. Some of you know Olivia. And she's probably under her mother, Sylvia. Remember, Sylvia was the gargoyle at the top of the house? Well, her second daughter, Olivia, is my goddaughter. So Ramon has two nieces from his sister, Sylvia. And they're like my own daughters. I don't have kids, but they're the closest things I got. So I like when they tune in and kind of support us. So tomorrow night, we'll find out if I followed Norman or not. And then, I don't know if you noticed this, but we haven't been really hearing a lot about the spooky things going on in the house. Because I've been out on the streets meeting all these other people, the real life characters, like I said. The interesting thing about my time in the house was, I supposedly had ghosts, but it was the real life people I was meeting that were the more interesting ones. So we're going to meet a couple more interesting people, and then some more scary things start happening in the house. So, hang on a second. We're going to meet a guy named Godwin Goodwin, who was part of a kind of sect, a weird religion I've never heard about since. He kind of lets me know a little more about the voodoo stuff going on in the neighborhood. And then my friend Kelly Atkins, the crazy one, who some of you know, he puts me on the lead of a woman in the neighborhood or outside the neighborhood who does voodoo. And so we meet her in a local watering hole called The Tavern at on 4th Street. And that then leads to my favorite chapter of all, which happened on Halloween night that year, where I attended a voodoo ceremony with the leader, Mama Wawa, a woman from Jamaica, and her 4 voodoo acolytes who were all drag queens in black lycra or black nylon suits. And it took place in Eastern Cemetery. So if any of you are from Louisville, you might know Eastern Cemetery. It was a place made the news in the 1980s because they found out the cemetery board, they'd been burying people in the same grave over and over for years. Some places, the backhoes were like cutting trenches perpendicular to the actual graves that were there. It was a huge scandal. So we'll find out more about this when we continue our reading tomorrow night. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope you all had a good Friday. It was kind of rainy here in Louisville. I hope you had good weather wherever you were. By the way, I'm going to share a little video. I went around Old Louisville yesterday. It was a beautiful spring day, and I took a lot of videos and I put them together in a little compilation of what I call Springtime in Old Louisville. Got some jaunty music to it. So working on videos and trying to kind of let people know what the neighborhood's all about. People who live in Old Louisville know what a beautiful neighborhood it is. People who don't live in this area or haven't been here, they might not know how beautiful this great Victorian neighborhood is. So watch tomorrow and I'll share a link, a little 10-minute movie where you can see what the neighborhood looks like right now. I'm also going to make a movie or two about what it looks like at night, where you see some of these spooky places. So thanks again, everyone for tuning in. I see a lot of people checking in and saying hi. So thanks, everyone. And thanks, Sean. Like I said before, thanks to Sean Stafford for all the great help he's rendered. And he's with Hunley Media. If If you know anything about Louisville, he's kind of a local mover and shaker. So good to see all my old friends. Good to see lots of new friends. And like I said, can't wait till after this is all over and done with. We get to see each other and in happier times, and we can reminisce about the 3 or 4 or 5 weeks that we spent night times together in the Magic Library. And just so you know, I'm still working on the merchandise and stuff. We're working on a Magic Library T-shirt, but still not up there yet. So just hang tight. And there's David McHugh saying thanks. So good seeing you, David. Everyone, say hi to David McHugh. He's one of the charter members of the Thursday Night Dinner Club. And remind me tomorrow night, I'll show you some of our artifacts from the Thursday Night Dinner Club. We have like old ancient documents that are transcribed from the old Sanskrit. And we have like an antique chalice. We have all these things that we pull out when we have our initiation rituals. And like some people have gone through the initiation, like Matt Sweeney and Mike Horan. Remind me tomorrow night and I'll pull out some of these artifacts and show you the artifacts of our Thursday Night Dinner Club parties, okay? So thanks again, everyone. Take care. Chuck Bailey, good to see you. Hope to see you at one of the writers' meetings soon. They got one coming up Sunday. I don't know if I'm going to be able to attend virtually, but I'll send you some details via Facebook. But good seeing everyone. Charles Rains, he's always such a good regular. Hope to see Charles in person someday soon, and everyone else. Thanks again. Justin Davis shared it. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, it does sound interesting, Lisa. I don't know. I'm laughing at the thing Justin just posted, but it made me laugh anyway. So thanks, VG. And yeah, VG would know something about Sanskrit, really? Yeah, we got the old original Sanskrit document. So tune in tomorrow night. You'll see some of those. All right. No, David McHugh, I think you lost your veto power. Wendy had a coup one night when you were gone, and she replaced you with someone else, just so you know. But you have to talk to Wendy about that, okay? So thanks again, everyone. Good seeing you, and thanks for helping me get through this all. I hope that me getting on Facebook Live every night around 9 o'clock helps you make another day pass. So hang in there. We'll get through this, and love you all. See you soon. Good night.